What if you were told that 1 hour of prayer a day can quietly reshape your entire life? Not overnight, not with noise, but with power. Most people pray when they are desperate. Some pray when they are afraid. Others pray when they need answers. But very few stay long enough for transformation to happen. And that's the difference. Something shifts when prayer moves from a moment to a place. Jesus didn't ask his disciples for talent. He didn't ask for intelligence. He asked one question. Could you not watch with me for 1 hour? That question is still echoing today. This is not about religious routine. This is not about impressing God. This is about what happens to you when you remain. Subscribe now and join us in proclaiming that Jesus is Lord of all. When you pray for 1 hour daily, layers begin to fall off. Distractions lose their grip. Your spirit becomes alert. What once confused you starts to make sense. What once controlled you starts to weaken. At first it feels uncomfortable. Your mind wanders. Time moves slowly. But if you stay, something awakens. Because the deepest breakthroughs don't happen at the beginning of prayer. They happen after you decide not to leave. Stay with us. What you're about to hear may explain why your life has been feeling stuck and how 1 hour can change everything. Number 1, spiritual sensitivity increases. When you commit to 1 hour of prayer daily, one of the first changes that begins to surface is not external. It happens quietly, internally, almost unnoticed at first. Your spiritual sensitivity increases. You start to perceive things you once ignored. You become aware of movements, warnings, and promptings that previously passed by without recognition. This is not imagination. It is awareness being sharpened through consistency. Spiritual sensitivity is not mystical exaggeration. It is the ability to recognize what is happening beneath the surface of everyday life. Before, you reacted to situations without understanding why they felt heavy or unsettling. You entered conversations and environments unaware of their influence on your spirit. But as time in prayer increases, discernment begins to wake up. You sense when something is off even before evidence appears. You recognize when peace leaves a situation. You become aware of what strengthens you and what drains you. At first, this heightened sensitivity can feel uncomfortable. You start noticing distractions more clearly. You recognize patterns that once felt normal but were quietly destructive. Certain entertainment no longer sits the same. Certain conversations feel empty. Certain habits lose their appeal. This is not loss. It is clarity. When your spirit becomes sensitive, it stops tolerating what once kept it dull. Many people mistake numbness for peace. They believe that feeling nothing means they are stable. But numbness is often the result of overload. Too much noise, too many influences, too little stillness. 1 hour of prayer daily begins to clear that overload. As the noise fades, sensitivity returns. You feel again. You discern again. You notice again. This sensitivity does not make you weaker. It makes you more precise. You begin to recognize the difference between urgency and importance. You sense when to speak and when silence carries more authority. You notice when a door is opening and when resistance is signaling a warning rather than an obstacle to push through. Life stops being random. Patterns become visible. With increased sensitivity comes conviction, not condemnation, but inner alignment. You start catching yourself before certain words leave your mouth. You pause before reacting emotionally. You sense when a decision is being driven by fear instead of wisdom. This does not happen because someone tells you what is right or wrong. It happens because your inner awareness has been recalibrated. 1 hour of daily prayer trains your attention. It teaches your spirit to stay alert instead of drifting. Most people live disconnected from their inner life. They move from task to task, without ever checking what is happening inside them. Prayer reverses that habit. It teaches you to notice, and once you learn to notice, you cannot return to being careless. Spiritual sensitivity also changes how you handle pressure. Before, stress controlled your reactions. Now, you recognize pressure early. You sense when something is beginning to weigh on you, and you address it before it escalates. You stop allowing small compromises to grow into large consequences. You detect shifts before damage occurs. As this sensitivity grows, relationships begin to change. You become aware of dynamics that were once invisible. You notice when the connection is mutual and when it is draining. You sense when words are sincere and when they are manipulative. This does not make you suspicious. It makes you discerning. You stop absorbing emotional weight that was never meant to be carried. Your environment also responds to this shift. When your inner awareness sharpens, your external choices follow. You gravitate towards spaces that support clarity. You distance yourself from atmospheres that thrive on chaos. You no longer need to force boundaries. Sensitivity enforces them naturally. There is also an increase in responsiveness. When guidance comes, you recognize it faster. You do not need repeated signs or external confirmation for everything. You develop confidence in discernment. That confidence reduces hesitation. You move with intention instead of confusion. Delay decreases because awareness has increased. This sensitivity does not make life easier in the sense of avoiding all difficulty. It makes life clearer. You understand why certain challenges appear. You recognize what is meant to strengthen you and what is meant to redirect you. Confusion loses its dominance because perception has sharpened. Over time, you realize that spiritual sensitivity is not something you turn on when needed. It becomes your default state. You live aware. You move attentively. You respond rather than react. This awareness spills into every area of life. Work becomes more focused. Conversations become more intentional. Decisions become more grounded. One of the most powerful aspects of increased sensitivity is how it affects temptation. You no longer fall into things blindly. You sense the pull before it tightens. You recognize the setup before it unfolds. Awareness creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice restores control. As prayer continues daily, sensitivity deepens further. You begin to sense timing. You know when to wait and when to act. You stop forcing outcomes prematurely. You understand that restraint can be just as powerful as action. This awareness protects you from unnecessary struggle. Spiritual sensitivity also strengthens resilience. When difficulty comes, you are not caught off guard. You sensed it approaching. You prepared internally. You are not shaken by every disruption because awareness has stabilized you. You understand that not every challenge is an emergency. Eventually, you realize that this sensitivity is not something you earned through effort. It is the natural result of presence. When you stay long enough, awareness awakens. When awareness awakens, life becomes clearer. And when life becomes clearer, you move with purpose instead of confusion. This is what happens when prayer becomes consistent, not a dramatic spectacle, not constant emotion, but a quiet, steady awakening. You begin to see what others miss. You begin to sense what others ignore. And without saying much, your life starts reflecting clarity, restraint, and depth. Spiritual sensitivity increases, and with it, everything else begins to align. Number 2, mental clarity and peace grow. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, the mind is one of the first places where change becomes visible. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady and undeniable. Mental clarity and peace begin to grow, not because problems disappear, but because the noise inside you starts to settle. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once felt urgent loses its power to dominate your thoughts. Most mental exhaustion does not come from responsibility. It comes from unfiltered thinking, thoughts running unchecked, worries stacking without resolution, replaying conversations, anticipating outcomes that may never happen. The mind becomes crowded, and in that crowd, peace cannot survive. Daily prayer interrupts that cycle. It creates space where the mind can slow down long enough to reset. At first, this slowing feels uncomfortable. You become aware of how restless your thoughts actually are. Silence exposes the chaos that distraction was hiding. But if you remain, the turbulence begins to calm. Thoughts lose their urgency. You stop chasing every idea that appears. Mental discipline forms quietly through consistency. Clarity does not mean you suddenly have all the answers. It means you can see what matters and what does not. The mind stops reacting to everything equally. You begin to distinguish between real concerns and imagined ones. This alone brings relief. When everything is no longer treated as a crisis, peace has room to grow. As clarity increases, decision-making changes. You no longer feel rushed to respond. You do not need immediate certainty to feel stable. You become comfortable with process. Confusion weakens because your mind is no longer fragmented. Focus returns. You can hold one thought without being interrupted by 10 others. Mental peace is often misunderstood. People think peace means the absence of difficulty. But peace is stability within difficulty. It is the ability to remain centered while life continues to move. 1 hour of daily prayer trains the mind to return to center again and again. Over time, this becomes natural. You start noticing that external chaos has less influence over your internal state. News, opinions, conflict, and pressure still exist, but they no longer control your emotional responses. You observe rather than absorb. This distance protects your peace. It allows you to stay informed without becoming overwhelmed. The mind also becomes less reactive. Before, a single comment could disturb your entire day. A small inconvenience could derail your mood. But as peace grows, reactions soften. You pause before responding. You process instead of exploding. This is not suppression, it is regulation. Clarity also reveals patterns. You begin to recognize mental habits that were draining you. Overthinking, self-criticism, imagining worst-case scenarios. Once seen, these patterns lose power. Awareness breaks cycles that effort never could. Peace grows when the mind stops fighting itself. Another change that occurs is emotional balance. Emotions no longer swing as wildly. You experience joy without fear of losing it. You experience sadness without being consumed by it. Emotions become signals rather than rulers. This balance is a direct result of mental clarity. As prayer remains consistent, the mind becomes more present. You stop living entirely in the past or future. Regret and anxiety loosen their grip. You engage with what is in front of you. This presence alone reduces mental strain. Peace grows when the mind is where the body already is. Mental clarity also improves concentration. You can work without constant distraction. You can listen without preparing your response. You can rest without feeling guilty. This ability to focus deeply is increasingly rare, yet it returns naturally through disciplined stillness. You also begin to sleep differently. The mind settles more easily at night. Thoughts do not spiral as intensely. Rest becomes deeper. And with better rest, clarity increases further. It becomes a cycle of restoration. Peace does not make you passive. It makes you effective. A calm mind sees options more clearly. It handles conflict with wisdom. It navigates pressure without panic. You do not lose urgency for what matters. You lose anxiety about what does not. Over time, others may notice the change before you do. Your responses are steadier. Your presence feels grounded. You are not easily shaken. This is not personality change. It is mental order replacing mental clutter. Mental clarity also affects how you view yourself. Self-understanding increases. You stop being confused about your own motivations. You recognize when fear is influencing your choices. You catch self-deception early. This honesty brings freedom. Peace grows when the mind is no longer divided against itself. One of the most powerful aspects of this clarity is how it handles uncertainty. You no longer need complete control to feel safe. You can live with unanswered questions without losing peace. This stability is rare and deeply transformative. As days turn into weeks, you realize that peace has become less dependent on circumstances. It is no longer something you chase. It is something you carry. Even in moments of tension, there is an underlying steadiness that remains. Mental clarity and peace do not arrive suddenly. They grow quietly through consistency. They deepen through repetition. 1 hour of daily prayer retrains the mind to release what it cannot control and focus on what it can steward. Eventually, clarity becomes your default and chaos becomes the exception. The mind becomes a place of order instead of noise. Peace becomes familiar rather than occasional. And without striving for it, you find yourself living with greater calm, greater focus, and greater strength in every area of life. Number 3, inner strength is released. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, something begins to rise inside you that was always there, but rarely accessed. Inner strength is released. Not the kind of strength that announces itself loudly or seeks recognition, but a steady endurance that holds you upright when pressure increases. You do not suddenly become fearless. You become grounded, and that grounding changes how you carry weight. Before this strength is activated, life often feels heavier than it should. Small setbacks feel exhausting. Delays feel personal. Resistance feels like failure. But as consistency in prayer deepens, your capacity expands. The same challenges appear, yet they no longer crush you. You realize that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to remain stable within it. This strength begins quietly. You notice it in your reactions. What once drained you emotionally no longer consumes your energy. You recover faster. You do not spiral as deeply. You are able to stand in situations that previously overwhelmed you. This is not emotional numbness, it is resilience. Inner strength also changes how you relate to discomfort. Before, discomfort triggered avoidance. You escaped, distracted yourself, or quit prematurely. But as strength grows, you stop running from what stretches you. You learn to remain present, even when things feel tense or unresolved. This endurance builds confidence. You begin to trust yourself again. Pressure reveals strength more than comfort ever could. And as prayer becomes daily, pressure no longer feels like a threat to your stability. You recognize it as part of growth. You stop interpreting resistance as a sign to retreat. Instead, you ask what it is developing within you. This shift alone transforms how you move through adversity. Another sign of inner strength being released is restraint. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself. You do not react to every challenge to your ego. Silence becomes a form of strength. Patience becomes power. You realize that not every battle requires engagement. This strength also brings emotional regulation. You feel deeply, but emotions no longer control your behavior. Anger does not dictate your words. Fear does not dictate your decisions. You acknowledge emotions without surrendering to them. That ability is a form of mastery that only develops through inner stability. As strength increases, boundaries become clearer. You recognize when something is costing you more than it is giving. You stop overextending yourself to earn approval. You protect your energy without guilt. This is not hardness, it is wisdom. Inner strength also affects perseverance. You stop quitting at the first sign of difficulty. You learn to stay with processes that require time. You do not need immediate results to remain committed. This endurance changes outcomes. Many breakthroughs are reached not through talent, but through the ability to remain consistent when motivation fades. You also become less dependent on external validation. Praise no longer inflates you. Criticism no longer devastates you. Your sense of worth stabilizes internally. This independence is liberating. You act from conviction rather than reaction. There is also a strengthening of resolve. You make decisions with greater certainty. You stop second-guessing every choice. Even when outcomes are uncertain, your direction feels firm. This resolve reduces anxiety. You trust your ability to handle what comes next. As inner strength develops, fear loses its dominance. Fear may still appear, but it no longer commands your actions. You move forward even while feeling uncertain. Courage becomes practical rather than dramatic. You do what needs to be done without waiting to feel ready. This strength also reveals itself in endurance over time. You can sustain effort without burning out. You recognize when to rest and when to push. Balance replaces extremes. You are no longer driven solely by urgency. You are guided by steadiness. Another change is the ability to carry responsibility without collapse. You handle weight with composure. You do not fall apart under expectations. You learn how to hold complexity without losing clarity. This maturity is a direct result of inner strengthening. Inner strength also deepens compassion. When you are stable within yourself, you are less reactive toward others. You respond with patience rather than irritation. You understand that everyone is carrying something. Strength does not harden you. It softens you while keeping you firm. Over time, you notice that challenges that once defined you no longer do. They become chapters rather than identities. You are not shaped by every hardship. You pass through them with perspective intact. This strength is not borrowed. It is not dependent on circumstances aligning. It is built quietly through consistency. 1 hour of daily prayer creates a foundation that does not collapse under stress. You become someone who can be relied upon, including by yourself. Eventually, inner strength becomes your default posture. You stand without constant reinforcement. You move without constant reassurance. You remain steady when others panic. Not because you are superior, but because you are anchored. Inner strength being released does not make life effortless. It makes life manageable. You stop being surprised by difficulty. You stop being undone by delay. You understand that growth requires resistance. And in that understanding, you carry yourself differently. You speak with calm. You act with intention. You endure with confidence. Inner strength is no longer something you hope for. It is something you live from. Number 4, faith becomes experiential. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, faith begins to shift from concept to experience. It stops living only in language and starts taking form in reality. Before, faith may have been something you believed in theory, something you agreed with intellectually, something you admired from a distance. But consistency changes proximity, and proximity changes understanding. Experiential faith is not louder than theoretical faith. It is quieter and far more grounded. It does not rely on constant reassurance or explanation. It is formed through repeated encounters with reliability. You begin to recognize patterns of guidance, timing, and provision that cannot be explained away as coincidence. Faith stops being an idea you defend and becomes a reality you recognize. At first, this transition is subtle. You notice small confirmations, moments where clarity arrives exactly when confusion was building. Instances where restraint saved you from consequences you only recognized later. You begin to connect internal promptings with external outcomes. This connection builds trust, and trust deepens faith. As faith becomes experiential, doubt changes shape. It does not disappear completely, but it loses its authority. Doubt becomes a question rather than a conclusion. You no longer collapse at uncertainty. You can live with mystery without losing confidence. This stability comes from having seen enough evidence to remain anchored. Experiential faith also reshapes expectation. You stop demanding immediate outcomes as proof. You understand the process. You recognize that not every result is visible right away. This patience is not passive. It is informed by experience. You have seen growth emerge over time, and that memory steadies you when progress feels slow. Another shift occurs in how you interpret challenges. Before, difficulty felt like a contradiction. Now, it feels like context. You understand that resistance does not negate purpose. You stop interpreting struggle as abandonment. Experience has taught you that growth often arrives through tension. Faith becomes experiential when you begin to trust alignment more than appearance. Situations that once looked like setbacks reveal themselves as redirection. Delays that once caused frustration become moments of preparation. This perspective only forms when you have witnessed outcomes unfold beyond your initial understanding. As this faith deepens, fear weakens. Fear thrives in uncertainty, but experience reduces uncertainty. You have seen resilience develop where you expected collapse. You have seen solutions appear where you anticipated loss. Memory becomes a source of strength. You are not relying on hope alone. You are relying on history. Experiential faith also affects obedience. You no longer act from obligation. You act from recognition. You have seen the consequences of alignment and the cost of resistance. This awareness changes motivation. Compliance becomes trust in action rather than forced discipline. Another sign of experiential faith is endurance. You stay committed even when emotions fluctuate. You do not abandon consistency because feelings change. You understand that experience is built through persistence. Faith stops being dependent on inspiration and becomes anchored in commitment. This kind of faith also simplifies your inner life. You stop overanalyzing every outcome. You do not need constant interpretation. You recognize when something is meant to be accepted rather than explained. This simplicity brings peace. Faith no longer requires constant mental negotiation. Experiential faith also reshapes your view of identity. You stop seeing yourself as fragile. You recognize that you are capable of withstanding more than you thought. You trust that you will be supported through what you are called to face. This confidence is not arrogance. It is awareness shaped by experience. You also notice that your reactions change. When unexpected situations arise, panic is replaced with curiosity. You ask what is unfolding rather than assuming the worst. This shift in posture reflects a deeper trust in process. As faith becomes experiential, language changes. You speak with fewer absolutes and more certainty. You do not exaggerate. You do not overpromise. You simply know what you have seen. This grounded confidence is persuasive without being forceful. Experiential faith also influences how you handle unanswered questions. You do not need immediate clarity to move forward. You trust that understanding will come when needed. This patience reduces anxiety and preserves focus. Over time, you realize that faith is no longer something you reach for in crisis. It is something that carries you through daily life. It informs decisions. It steadies emotions. It guides responses. It becomes integrated rather than activated only when necessary. This faith also matures your expectations of growth. You stop expecting perfection. You expect progress. You allow space for learning. You understand that experience is cumulative. Every season adds depth. Eventually, you recognize that faith has become lived rather than learned. It is present in how you move, choose, and respond. It no longer needs constant reinforcement. It is reinforced by memory. Faith becoming experiential does not mean life becomes predictable. It means you become stable within unpredictability. You trust not because everything is controlled, but because you have seen consistency within change. And in that lived understanding, faith stops being fragile. It becomes resilient. It becomes quiet. It becomes strong. It becomes something you stand on rather than something you explain. Number 5. Emotional healing begins. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, emotional healing begins not with intensity, but with honesty. Layers that were held together by distractions start to loosen. Feelings that were buried for survival begin to surface. This is not regression. It is exposure. Healing cannot start where pain is denied. It starts where pain is finally acknowledged without judgment. For many, emotional wounds were never addressed because there was never space to address them. Life moved too fast. Responsibilities demanded attention. Survival required suppression. Over time, emotions were managed rather than healed, but consistency creates safety, and safety allows truth to emerge. At first, this process can feel unsettling. Old memories return. Past disappointments resurface. Unresolved grief makes itself known. You may wonder why things you thought were over suddenly feel close again. But this is not reopening wounds. It is allowing them to close properly. Emotional healing is not about erasing the past. It is about changing how the past lives within you. You begin to see events with new perspective. What once felt like personal failure reveals itself as limitation. What once felt like rejection reveals itself as misalignment. Understanding grows, and with it, compassion toward yourself. As healing begins, emotional reactions change. Triggers lose intensity. Situations that once caused disproportionate responses now pass with less disruption. You notice pauses where there used to be impulses. This is a sign of integration. Your emotions are no longer operating independently of awareness. Another shift occurs in self-talk. The internal voice softens. Harsh judgment gives way to clarity. You stop punishing yourself for having felt pain. You recognize that emotional responses were adaptations, not weaknesses. This recognition restores dignity. Healing also reveals emotional fatigue that went unnoticed. You realize how long you carried weight that was never processed. As that weight is released, energy returns. You feel lighter without knowing exactly why. This lightness is not excitement, it is relief. As consistency continues, boundaries improve. You stop overgiving to compensate for old wounds. You no longer seek validation to fill emotional gaps. Relationships begin to rebalance. You show up more whole rather than seeking completion from others. Emotional healing also changes how you experience joy. Before, joy felt fragile. You feared losing it. Now, joy feels safer. You allow yourself to enjoy moments without anticipating their end. This presence enhances fulfillment. Grief is also transformed through this process. Loss is no longer avoided. It is integrated. You allow yourself to mourn without being consumed. Grief becomes a chapter rather than a constant companion. Healing does not remove loss. It restores function after loss. Another sign of healing is forgiveness, not as obligation, but as release. You stop replaying offenses. You stop needing closure from others. Not because what happened was acceptable, but because carrying it no longer serves you. This release creates internal space. Emotional healing also stabilizes identity. You stop defining yourself by what hurt you. You stop rehearsing narratives of damage. You recognize that pain shaped you, but did not define you. This shift restores agency. As healing deepens, emotional honesty increases. You no longer pretend to be unaffected. You acknowledge when something matters. You allow yourself to feel without fear of being overwhelmed. This honesty strengthens emotional resilience. Another change appears in how you handle conflict. You respond rather than react. You express rather than explode. You listen without defensiveness. Healing gives you access to calm expression even in difficult conversations. Healing also reveals emotional patterns inherited from the past. Behaviors learned in survival no longer dictate your responses. You recognize what was modeled and choose differently. This awareness breaks cycles. Over time, emotional healing restores trust in yourself. You trust your emotions without being ruled by them. You trust your capacity to process pain. You no longer fear being undone by feeling. This healing is not linear. Some days feel lighter, others feel heavy. But even the heaviness changes. It no longer feels endless. You know movement is happening even when it is slow. Eventually, you realize that emotional healing has not made you less sensitive. It has made you more stable. You still feel deeply, but you are no longer flooded. You carry emotion without being carried away by it. This healing also affects compassion toward others. You become less reactive to their wounds. You recognize pain behind behavior. This does not excuse harm, but it informs response. Understanding replaces bitterness. Emotional healing does not announce itself with sudden transformation. It reveals itself in quiet moments, in calm reactions, in the absence of old patterns, in the ability to feel without fear. As 1 hour of daily prayer continues, emotional healing becomes a foundation rather than a process. You are no longer constantly repairing damage. You are maintaining wholeness. The past loses its grip. The present becomes manageable. And your inner world becomes a place of stability rather than conflict. Number 6, decision-making improves. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, decision-making begins to improve in ways that are subtle yet decisive. You do not suddenly become certain about everything. Instead, confusion loses its grip. The constant inner debate quiets. Choices that once felt heavy begin to feel clearer, not because every option is perfect, but because your inner alignment becomes stronger. Poor decisions are rarely caused by lack of intelligence. They are usually caused by noise, emotional pressure, fear of missing out, desire for approval, fatigue. When these forces dominate, clarity is compromised. Consistent prayer reduces that noise. As internal clutter clears, discernment strengthens. At first, this shows up as restraint. You stop making impulsive choices. You pause where you once rushed. You become comfortable with not deciding immediately. This patience is not indecision, it is maturity. You recognize that timing matters as much as choice. As decision-making improves, emotional influence weakens. You still feel emotions, but they no longer dictate outcomes. You can acknowledge excitement without being reckless. You can acknowledge fear without being paralyzed. This balance allows you to choose with steadiness rather than intensity. Another shift occurs in motivation. You begin to recognize why you want certain things. You notice when a desire is driven by insecurity rather than purpose. This awareness protects you from self-sabotage. You stop chasing options that look good but cost too much internally. Decision-making also improves through clarity of values. When your inner life becomes more ordered, priorities become obvious. You know what you are willing to compromise on and what you are not. This clarity reduces internal conflict. Decisions align with who you are becoming rather than who you were reacting from. You also become more aware of consequences, not in a fearful way, but in a thoughtful one. You consider outcomes beyond immediate relief. This long view strengthens wisdom. You stop trading future stability for short-term comfort. As consistency continues, you notice that decisions feel less dramatic. You do not attach unnecessary weight to every choice. You understand that some decisions are adjustments, not life-defining moments. This perspective reduces anxiety and improves execution. Another change is confidence. Not arrogance, but trust in your ability to choose and adapt. You stop fearing mistakes as catastrophes. You recognize that even when outcomes are imperfect, you can respond effectively. This confidence reduces paralysis. Improved decision-making also affects relationships. You choose conversations more carefully. You set boundaries more clearly. You know when to engage and when to step back. This discernment prevents unnecessary conflict and preserves energy. You also become less influenced by external opinions. Advice no longer overrides internal clarity. You listen without surrendering responsibility. This independence is not isolation. It is ownership of your life. As clarity increases, patterns emerge. You begin to recognize recurring situations that led to regret in the past. With awareness, you choose differently. History becomes a teacher rather than a weight. Decision-making also improves through emotional regulation. You are less likely to decide when exhausted, overwhelmed, or reactive. You learn to wait for internal steadiness before committing. This timing reduces regret. Another sign of improvement is simplicity. You stop overcomplicating choices. You identify the core issue and address it directly. You waste less time debating irrelevant details. This efficiency increases effectiveness. As days turn into weeks, you notice that outcomes begin to align more consistently with intention. You experience fewer avoidable problems. When difficulties arise, they are less often the result of poor judgment. This builds trust in the process. Improved decision-making also deepens peace. You are not constantly second-guessing yourself. You do not replay every choice obsessively. You move forward with confidence, adjusting when necessary without self-condemnation. You also become more decisive in areas that require courage. You do not delay difficult conversations indefinitely. You address issues before they grow. This decisiveness prevents accumulation of unresolved tension. Another change is adaptability. You are not rigid. You recognize when a decision needs to be revisited. You adjust without seeing it as failure. This flexibility strengthens resilience. Over time, decision-making becomes less about control and more about alignment. You choose what supports growth rather than what avoids discomfort. This orientation leads to better long-term outcomes. Eventually, you realize that improved decision-making is not about perfection. It is about clarity, timing, and responsibility. You choose with awareness. You act with intention. You adjust with humility. 1 hour of daily prayer reshapes the inner environment where decisions are made. As that environment becomes calmer and clearer, choices naturally improve. Life becomes less reactive and more deliberate. And with each aligned decision, confidence and stability continue to grow. Number 7. Spiritual authority develops. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, spiritual authority begins to develop in ways that are both subtle and unmistakable. This authority is not about dominance or control. It is not about impressing others or asserting superiority. It is the natural outcome of an internal alignment with purpose, clarity, and discernment. It is strength that emerges quietly from consistency and depth, rather than from loud proclamation. At first, you may not notice it. You may continue to feel ordinary, even as the world begins to respond differently around you. But over time, the effect becomes undeniable. You begin to recognize that your presence carries weight. Situations respond to your steadiness. People are drawn to your calm clarity, even when they do not fully understand why. This is authority born from inner stability. Spiritual authority develops as distractions lose their grip. Before consistency, the mind and spirit were often fragmented. External influences dictated reactions. Opinions, fears, and impulses competed for attention, leaving little space for deliberate action. As the inner life becomes disciplined, these distractions no longer dominate. Focus increases. Awareness sharpens. Decisions are no longer reactive, but measured. Authority begins where control over self is established. Once you can govern your own thoughts, emotions, and responses, influence over circumstances becomes possible. Another aspect of spiritual authority is discernment. Authority is not simply power, it is precision. It is the ability to recognize what is present and act appropriately. When alignment grows, insight deepens. You begin to sense dynamics that others miss. You recognize patterns, intentions, and undercurrents in conversations, situations, and environments. You understand when to act and when restraint carries more weight than action. This discernment strengthens authority because it demonstrates wisdom rather than force. Consistency also builds credibility, even within your own life. People respond to those who demonstrate reliability. Spiritual authority is strengthened by integrity. When your inner life is aligned with your outward actions, others recognize stability. Your words carry weight because they are supported by consistent character. Authority grows quietly as trust in your judgment develops naturally. It is not claimed, it is observed. Inner strength and resilience are central to developing spiritual authority. Authority does not emerge from ease. It emerges from endurance. The ability to remain steady under pressure, to navigate difficulty without collapsing, and to respond without panic signals authority. Situations sense when a person is anchored and respond accordingly. The world often yields to quiet strength more than to loud assertion. Spiritual authority also grows through influence rather than manipulation. It is not coercion, it is presence. A person with authority can change an atmosphere without needing to speak. Their calm steadiness creates room for others to respond constructively. Authority manifests as the capacity to redirect energy, not by force, but by example. People feel the shift before they can explain it. Another sign of developing authority is the ability to resist control by external forces. You are no longer easily shaken by criticism, opposition, or disagreement. You maintain composure even in challenging circumstances. This internal independence strengthens external influence because it signals stability. Authority is most compelling when it is rooted in self-mastery. As authority grows, boundaries become more effective. You are able to assert limits without aggression. You protect your energy and space while maintaining fairness and respect. People respect this because it is consistent and predictable. Boundaries no longer feel arbitrary. They are expressions of internal order. This contributes to the perception and reality of authority. Spiritual authority is also relational. You begin to notice that influence is not about asserting superiority, but about inspiring confidence. Others respond to those who demonstrate clarity, consistency, and strength. Authority is reinforced when your presence creates order, focus, and composure in interactions. People do not resist someone who embodies stability. They are naturally guided by it. Faith and consistency enhance authority as well. Authority strengthens when decisions, actions, and words are aligned with values and principles that have been tested over time. When your life consistently demonstrates conviction and integrity, authority becomes visible. This is different from control. It is influence rooted in trustworthiness, experience, and insight. Another element of authority is calmness in crisis. People notice how you respond when pressure rises. Authority emerges most clearly in moments of tension, uncertainty, or conflict. When you remain grounded while others panic, your influence increases. Calm decisiveness signals reliability and strength. It is often more persuasive than any argument or command. Spiritual authority also deepens through humility. Authority that is arrogant or self-serving is fragile and fleeting. True authority grows when it is rooted in awareness of limits, respect for others, and the ability to listen and learn. Humility enhances influence because it allows others to trust without feeling threatened. Authority that guides rather than dominates is enduring. Over time, spiritual authority expands beyond personal influence to affect larger circumstances. Situations begin to respond differently. Opportunities align more naturally. Resistance is met with insight rather than brute effort. The development of authority changes how life unfolds because it reshapes interaction with environments, people, and challenges. It is subtle but undeniable. Another aspect of authority is clarity of purpose. Authority grows when intention is visible in action. People recognize when someone is aligned with their principles and calling. Decisions carry weight not because of force, but because they reflect consistent alignment with a deeper sense of direction. Authority and purpose are inseparable. One cannot exist fully without the other. Spiritual authority is cumulative. It is not instantaneous. It is built over time through consistency, alignment, discernment, and endurance. Each experience of remaining steady, each moment of clarity, each act of integrity adds to it. It cannot be faked or rushed. It must be lived. Eventually, you notice that authority becomes second nature. You influence without effort. You guide without asserting. You navigate complexity without being overwhelmed. Authority is no longer something you pursue. It is something you carry. Presence itself communicates reliability, wisdom, and strength. Developing spiritual authority does not remove challenges. It does not eliminate opposition or difficulty. What it does is equip you to face them from a position of stability. You are not shaken by obstacles. You are not ruled by external pressure. You respond with precision, clarity, and resilience. At the core, spiritual authority is the intersection of alignment, consistency, discernment, and endurance. It is not a show of power. It is quiet influence that manifests in how life responds to your presence, how people trust your judgment, and how you remain anchored in the midst of uncertainty. 1 hour of daily prayer cultivates the inner conditions for this authority to emerge naturally, and over time, it transforms how you interact with the world and how the world responds to you. Number 8. Desires align with God's will. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, a remarkable shift begins to take place within your inner life. Desires that once pulled in many directions begin to align with a higher sense of purpose. What was previously impulsive, scattered, or self-serving starts to find order. This alignment is not forced or contrived. It emerges naturally as the inner environment changes. Your heart and mind begin to converge with a sense of direction that surpasses mere personal preference. At first, the change is subtle. You notice that the things you once longed for no longer excite you in the same way. Some ambitions that felt urgent lose their grip. Others that once seemed distant now feel appropriate, timely, and satisfying. It is not that you suddenly lose passion, it is that passion finds focus. Your energy begins to flow toward what matters most, rather than being dissipated on fleeting or shallow pursuits. This is the beginning of alignment between desire and divine purpose. As desires realign, clarity grows. You start to recognize the difference between what is temporary and what is lasting. Impulsive wants are replaced by thoughtful intention. You no longer pursue outcomes simply because they seem attractive in the moment. Instead, a deeper discernment begins to guide your choices. This does not mean life becomes devoid of joy or ambition. It means that joy is no longer dependent on what is ultimately meaningless, and ambition is directed toward what carries eternal value. You begin to understand that the alignment of desire is itself a form of wisdom, allowing life to flow in a way that was previously unattainable. Another aspect of this alignment is peace. Internal conflict decreases because you are no longer pulled in opposing directions. When desires were unaligned, choices often caused anxiety or guilt. You wanted one thing, but knew it was unwise or inconsistent with your deeper values. That tension slowly dissipates as your inner yearnings harmonize with purpose. The result is a sense of peace that is both profound and practical. You experience less indecision, less regret, and less inner friction. Decisions become smoother because they reflect the desires that have been refined and focused. Alignment of desire also affects motivation. You find that actions once burdensome now carry energy and meaning. Tasks that previously felt like chores gain significance because they contribute to a larger vision. Your focus becomes sharper. You no longer expend energy on what distracts or misleads. You begin to recognize that consistent effort toward aligned goals produces results that feel satisfying and sustainable. Desire no longer leads to exhaustion, but to fulfillment. Motivation is no longer coerced. It flows naturally from internal harmony. As desires align, priorities shift. You begin to see what truly matters and what can be released. The trivial and transient lose their appeal. You stop chasing validation from others or accumulating what does not serve your growth. Instead, you pursue the opportunities, relationships, and experiences that contribute to meaningful development. This process reshapes how you live daily. The alignment of desires is not abstract. It manifests in choices, routines, and interactions. Life begins to feel purposeful in ways that were previously elusive. Another change occurs in patience. When desires are misaligned, impatience dominates. You pursue outcomes that are ill-timed or unrealistic. You struggle when results do not appear quickly. But as desires align, patience grows. You recognize that timing is integral to the fulfillment of meaningful goals. You wait without anxiety because you understand that the process itself is shaping you for the right outcomes. Patience becomes strength, not passivity. The alignment of desire teaches that the journey and preparation are as important as the destination. Emotional resilience increases as well. When desires are aligned, disappointment is less destabilizing. You experience setbacks with a grounded perspective, knowing that your focus is rooted in purpose rather than fleeting longing. This stability allows you to maintain composure and clarity when external circumstances are unpredictable. You are no longer ruled by frustration or the need for instant gratification. Desire that is aligned provides both direction and endurance. Another manifestation of this alignment is self-awareness. You become increasingly conscious of the motivations behind your wants. You notice when old patterns of fear, insecurity, or comparison arise. You recognize them and choose differently. Self-awareness acts as a filter, allowing only what is consistent with deeper purpose to guide your actions. This filtering process is gradual but transformative. It removes distractions and strengthens resolve. Alignment also enhances discernment in relationships. You begin to seek connections that are mutually supportive and growth-oriented rather than draining or destructive. Friendships, partnerships, and collaborations are evaluated through the lens of meaningful contribution and shared purpose. You no longer invest emotional energy into interactions that do not nourish or elevate. This discernment extends beyond relationships to opportunities and environments, creating a life structured around what truly matters. Spiritual sensitivity grows in tandem with desire alignment. You become increasingly aware of subtle promptings, intuition, and guidance. Internal cues that were previously overlooked now register as significant. You recognize when a choice resonates with deeper principles versus when it serves ego or convenience. This sensitivity strengthens alignment further, creating a feedback loop where desire, discernment, and awareness reinforce each other. Over time, the alignment of desires affects personal integrity. You act consistently with your values because your internal motivations are congruent with them. There is less internal conflict, less hypocrisy, and less compromise that feels uncomfortable. Your actions naturally reflect your refined priorities. This integrity strengthens character and builds credibility in all areas of life. Another transformation occurs in ambition. Goals become more strategic and intentional rather than impulsive or reactive. You pursue long-term fulfillment rather than short-term gratification. Planning, patience, and perseverance replace anxiety-driven action. Desire alignment produces a form of wisdom that guides ambition without overpowering it. As alignment deepens, joy and satisfaction increase. You experience a sense of fulfillment even in routine tasks because you recognize their contribution to meaningful outcomes. Joy becomes rooted in purpose rather than circumstance. Satisfaction arises naturally because actions and desires are no longer in conflict. Life feels coherent and intentional. Finally, one of the most profound changes is a sense of liberation. Misaligned desires create internal bondage, constantly pulling you toward what does not serve your growth. When desires are aligned, that bondage is released. You no longer feel compelled to chase what is empty or fleeting. Freedom is experienced not as a mere absence of restraint, but as the presence of focus, purpose, and resonance with what truly matters. Life becomes lighter, more directed, and more fulfilling. Ultimately, consistent alignment of desires transforms how you live, work, and relate to the world. It shapes decisions, relationships, and responses to challenges. It fosters patience, resilience, and clarity. 1 hour of daily prayer creates the inner conditions for this transformation, allowing desire to harmonize with purpose. Over time, you find that your aspirations are no longer scattered or chaotic. They are intentional, directed, and aligned with what matters most. This alignment is not imposed. It is cultivated. It is experienced. It is the quiet, transformative power that guides life toward fulfillment, meaning, and lasting impact. Number 9. Your environment shifts. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, you begin to notice subtle changes not just within yourself, but in the world around you. Your environment shifts in ways that feel almost imperceptible at first, yet gradually become undeniable. Spaces that once felt heavy or chaotic begin to carry a sense of ease. Circumstances that were persistently stressful begin to resolve more smoothly. It is not magic or chance. It is the natural effect of your own inner alignment rippling outward. As you grow steadier, calmer, and more grounded, the energy you carry transforms the environment. People, situations, and even opportunities respond to that inner change, often without conscious effort on your part. The shift begins with perception. When your inner state becomes more focused, peaceful, and centered, you start to see things differently. Problems no longer feel insurmountable. Conflicts that once appeared overwhelming now seem manageable. You begin to recognize patterns in situations that were previously hidden by confusion or emotional turbulence. This clarity allows you to navigate life with greater ease, and in turn, the environment responds. Chaos is no longer amplified by your internal reaction. It becomes something that can be engaged with purpose and discernment. Another change appears in the way people interact with you. Your presence becomes stabilizing. Others sense your composure and respond to it, often unconsciously. Conversations that used to escalate into tension now remain measured and constructive. People are drawn to your steadiness, seeking guidance, or simply benefiting from your calm. Your environment is influenced not through control, but through the resonance of your own inner state. Influence that once required effort now flows naturally because it is anchored in the consistency and depth you carry within yourself. As your inner life aligns, decision-making improves, and this shapes your environment further. Choices that were previously reactive now emerge from clarity and discernment. You handle situations with precision rather than panic. This approach reduces unnecessary friction and opens space for more constructive outcomes. Environments, whether personal, professional, or relational, begin to mirror the order you are cultivating within yourself. Opportunities that once seemed inaccessible start to present themselves. The world does not change in isolation. It responds to the shifts in how you operate and the energy you project. Consistency also changes the dynamics of relationships. You become less reactive and more intentional. Emotional outbursts, impulsive reactions, and unnecessary conflict diminish. As you carry steadiness into interactions, others begin to mirror it. Relationships that once felt draining begin to stabilize. Toxic influences naturally recede, not because you fight against them, but because your presence and choices create a natural boundary. People and situations that resonate with growth and alignment draw closer, while those that disrupt progress are no longer inadvertently reinforced. Another dimension of environmental shift is timing and synchronicity. When your focus and alignment increase, you begin to notice that events begin to fall into place with greater ease. Delays that once caused frustration now feel like preparation. Opportunities appear when you are ready to receive them rather than when you demand them. The environment seems to cooperate with the internal order you are cultivating. This does not eliminate challenges, but it allows you to move through them with greater efficiency and less resistance. Life begins to feel orchestrated rather than random. Environmental shifts also manifest in the energy of the spaces you inhabit. Places that previously felt heavy or tense begin to carry lightness and clarity. Your home, workspace, or community can feel different simply because the energy you bring into them has changed. Consistency fosters presence, and presence transforms space. The subtle vibrations you carry affect both people and surroundings. Noise, distraction, and disorder are less likely to dominate when your inner environment is calm and focused. Another effect is resilience within circumstances. When challenges arise, you navigate them with composure rather than panic. This steadiness influences the environment because your responses shape outcomes. You are able to respond rather than react. You create order where chaos once seemed to dominate. This capacity encourages others to rise to the occasion as well. Your environment does not simply reflect you, it begins to participate in your stability. Shifts also occur in the alignment of opportunities and resources. As your clarity and focus increase, you become more attuned to what is available and what is appropriate. You make choices that attract support, collaboration, and constructive influence. Resources that were previously overlooked or inaccessible come into view. The environment responds to competence, intentionality, and readiness. You find that life begins to offer solutions that once felt out of reach because your inner state has made you a suitable vessel for them. Another significant aspect of environmental shift is protection. As your consistency and alignment grow, the environment naturally distances you from unnecessary conflict and distraction. Negative influences lose their ability to dominate your attention or energy. Challenges still exist, but they are navigated with discernment rather than reaction. Your presence becomes a stabilizing force that preserves focus, encourages growth, and maintains order. The environment itself becomes a partner rather than an obstacle. Over time, these shifts accumulate. What once required constant effort now occurs with fluidity. Situations that were formerly burdensome begin to resolve naturally. People respond in ways that encourage rather than obstruct. Circumstances align with your focus, allowing for greater progress in all areas of life. The transformation is not dramatic or forced. It is the quiet result of consistency and internal development that eventually shapes the external world. Life itself begins to feel cooperative rather than adversarial. The most profound change is the recognition that the environment is not solely external. It is the reflection of internal alignment. When your inner life is disciplined, calm, and focused, the world around you inevitably mirrors that state. The environments that respond positively are not created by chance. They emerge from your consistent presence, clarity of purpose, and stability of action. Over time, you realize that you carry influence not by force, but by the resonance of your inner alignment. Ultimately, environmental shifts are a natural extension of inner transformation. As 1 hour of daily prayer creates consistency, stability, and clarity, the world responds. Opportunities, people, and circumstances begin to reflect the order you are cultivating within yourself. Challenges are navigated with discernment, relationships stabilize, and energy flows more freely. The environment does not change by magic. It changes because you have changed. And as that shift continues, life begins to unfold with greater ease, alignment, and purpose. Number 10. Spiritual consistency forms. When 1 hour of daily prayer becomes consistent, something profound begins to take root within the inner life. Spiritual consistency forms. This consistency is not simply about routine or habit. It is not a mechanical repetition or a matter of checking a box. It is the cultivation of an inner rhythm, a steady alignment of mind, heart, and spirit that transcends circumstances and mood. At first, it is subtle. You may not even notice it as it develops. You continue to engage day by day, sometimes distracted, sometimes challenged. Yet beneath the surface, an inner foundation is being laid. Each day adds a layer of discipline, awareness, and alignment that slowly begins to transform how you relate to yourself, to the world, and to higher principles. Spiritual consistency forms because repeated focus creates structure. Before, the inner life may have been irregular, swayed by emotion, impulse, or circumstance. One day you feel deeply connected, the next day disconnected or distracted. Over time, however, the act of returning to the same point of focus each day builds stability. You develop the ability to anchor yourself internally, independent of external chaos. This foundation allows the spirit to operate with steadiness, not volatility. The result is a rhythm that carries into every area of life, providing a center from which clarity, resilience, and discernment can grow. As consistency develops, it strengthens endurance. Life is unpredictable, and challenges do not wait for readiness. Without consistent inner alignment, the spirit becomes reactive, easily overwhelmed by pressure or distraction. Regular practice cultivates stamina, the capacity to remain centered, even in difficulty. Over time, challenges no longer destabilize as they once did. Your internal stability becomes a resource, not a fragile state, and the environment, circumstances, and people respond differently to your steadiness. What once felt exhausting now feels manageable. Energy is preserved, focus is maintained, and resilience is strengthened. Another dimension of forming spiritual consistency is trust in the process. When engagement is irregular, doubt easily arises. You wonder whether effort produces results, whether focus is meaningful, or whether your intentions matter at all. But when you return day after day, an unspoken understanding develops. Change occurs through sustained presence. Even without immediate evidence, the act itself produces transformation. Consistency becomes a demonstration of commitment, not perfection. This trust reinforces the habit, creating a cycle where engagement strengthens belief and belief strengthens engagement. Over time, the inner life moves from uncertainty to stability. Spiritual consistency also transforms perception. The repeated act of centering fosters clarity and discernment that were previously unavailable. You notice patterns, subtle influences, and connections that once went unnoticed. The mind becomes less cluttered and more observant. Emotional turbulence diminishes because repetition stabilizes focus. Life is no longer experienced through a lens of reactive emotion, but through the clarity of repeated alignment. This consistency forms a framework for navigating complexity with wisdom and composure. Another significant outcome of spiritual consistency is the deepening of integrity. When the inner life is disciplined, values are reinforced daily. You no longer compromise for convenience or sway based on temporary desire. Actions begin to reflect principles rather than impulse. This alignment between inner truth and outward behavior strengthens character. People and circumstances respond differently to someone whose internal foundation is steady. Trust is naturally built because others sense reliability in presence and action. Consistency produces influence without the need for assertion. It is the quiet power of stability that communicates competence and integrity. Consistency also fosters maturity in emotional life. Emotional reactions are no longer dictated by every disturbance or temptation. Repetition develops awareness of internal states, allowing observation rather than immediate reaction. Anger, frustration, or fear no longer dictate choices. You learn to pause, reflect, and respond from a place of steadiness. This patience and self-regulation are direct results of repeated, intentional engagement, and they further reinforce the stability that consistency produces. Life becomes less about reacting and more about navigating with purpose and understanding. The formation of spiritual consistency also enhances discernment in relationships. You become aware of what nourishes your growth and what distracts or diminishes it. Over time, repeated engagement creates an internal filter that aligns interaction with integrity and purpose. You recognize when to engage, when to step back, and when to create space for reflection. Others respond to this steadiness. Relationships that once caused exhaustion begin to stabilize. Interactions feel more constructive, balanced, and intentional. Consistency transforms not only the internal state, but also how the external world unfolds in response. Another aspect of forming consistency is the cultivation of patience. Transformation does not occur overnight, and neither do the results of consistent effort. As you engage day after day, you begin to trust the timing of growth. You are less reactive to immediate frustration, less desperate for immediate results, and more capable of enduring the process. Patience becomes a product of repetition, and with it, resilience and perspective are reinforced. The ability to wait without anxiety, to move forward without forcing, is a hallmark of spiritual consistency in action. Spiritual consistency also produces self-awareness. Repeated engagement allows you to observe patterns of thought, behavior, and reaction that would otherwise remain hidden. You notice impulses, desires, and distractions with greater clarity. You recognize habitual responses that no longer serve you and choose differently. This awareness is not judgmental. It is informative. It allows deliberate action rather than reactive behavior. Through this repeated practice, the spirit becomes disciplined, aware, and capable of navigating complexity with intentionality. Over time, consistency fosters a sense of authority within the inner life. You are no longer swayed by every fleeting feeling or external circumstance. Stability and alignment generate confidence in judgment and perception. Decision-making improves because it is rooted in repeated engagement and cultivated discernment. Influence grows naturally because steadiness produces reliability. Authority emerges quietly, not from assertion, but from the internal foundation built through regular, disciplined presence. Another dimension of spiritual consistency is the refinement of purpose. Repeated alignment clarifies what matters most and removes distractions that once seemed urgent. Goals, actions, and intentions become coherent with long-term direction. Energy that was scattered is focused. Effort produces tangible growth because it is intentional rather than random. Consistency brings direction to what once was scattered, forming a path of clarity and progress. Eventually, spiritual consistency becomes more than practice. It becomes identity. It is no longer simply an action taken, but a state carried. The internal life operates with rhythm, alignment, and stability that influence every aspect of living. Life feels coherent, intentional, and steady. Challenges are navigated with composure, relationships with discernment, and opportunities with readiness. The inner foundation supports growth, resilience, and influence. 1 hour of daily prayer cultivates the conditions for this consistency to emerge, forming a rhythm that carries into every area of life, creating strength, stability, and clarity that extend far beyond the initial act of engagement. Beloved, casual engagement with spiritual practice often feels comforting at first. It is easy, accessible, and requires little commitment. People turn to it in moments of need, during times of stress, or when life feels uncertain. It is spontaneous and reactive, prompted by circumstances rather than intention. The appeal is obvious. There is no schedule, no discipline, and no apparent obligation. Yet while casual engagement can provide temporary relief or a sense of connection, it rarely produces lasting transformation. It can soothe, but it does not necessarily change the underlying patterns of thought, emotion, or behavior. Casual practice exists in moments, whereas disciplined practice exists in a rhythm that shapes life. Casual engagement is characterized by inconsistency. One day, attention and focus may be present. The next, distraction dominates. The mind wanders, the heart drifts, and connection fluctuates based on mood, energy, or circumstance. This inconsistency leaves the inner life fragmented. When challenges arise, there is often little foundation to navigate them. Emotional turbulence, impulsive reactions, and internal confusion remain largely unaltered. Casual engagement rarely creates internal stability because it lacks the repetition necessary to form discipline. Without consistent effort, the inner life remains reactive rather than proactive. Patterns are left unchecked, and growth is sporadic, dependent on fleeting motivation rather than sustained effort. Disciplined engagement, by contrast, requires commitment and intention. It is consistent, intentional, and structured. It demands showing up even when focus is low, energy is depleted, or the external world is demanding. This consistency transforms the inner environment. The repeated effort cultivates stability, clarity, and resilience. Challenges no longer destabilize in the same way because internal foundations have been strengthened over time. Disciplined engagement is not dependent on emotion or circumstance. It relies on cultivated alignment, which produces lasting impact in thought, behavior, and perception. The results of disciplined effort are cumulative and enduring, creating a life that responds with steadiness rather than chaos. Casual practice often emphasizes what is immediate, visible, or emotionally gratifying. People engage when they feel the need for comfort, reassurance, or guidance. The experience is temporary, and once the immediate desire or problem passes, engagement may fade. It is reactive, shaped by external pressures rather than internal consistency. This leads to fluctuating momentum and variable outcomes. The inner life remains susceptible to distraction, stress, and reactive behavior. Casual engagement can calm or inspire momentarily, but it does not cultivate the depth of perception, stability, or wisdom that disciplined engagement produces. It exists in fragments and leaves much of the inner landscape untouched. Disciplined practice, on the other hand, emphasizes process over immediate outcome. It recognizes that transformation is cumulative and requires repetition. Commitment to consistency builds resilience, clarity, and focus. Challenges are faced with preparedness rather than panic. Internal patterns are gradually reshaped as awareness deepens. The mind becomes sharper, emotions more regulated, and behavior more intentional. Whereas casual engagement treats moments as isolated, disciplined engagement treats life as a continuous opportunity for refinement. It develops the capacity to respond with steadiness, regardless of external circumstance or internal distraction. Over time, disciplined effort produces results that are stable, sustainable, and profound. Another significant distinction lies in the formation of character. Casual engagement rarely challenges deep-seated habits, impulses, or fears. It can provide comfort, but it seldom requires sacrifice or self-discipline. As a result, growth is limited and fragmented. Disciplined engagement, however, requires perseverance, patience, and self-regulation. It demands that one show up consistently, even when it is inconvenient or difficult. This repetition strengthens character by teaching endurance, focus, and resilience. It transforms not only moments of engagement, but the underlying patterns that govern thoughts, reactions, and choices. Discipline creates an internal structure that casual engagement rarely touches. Casual engagement is often dependent on motivation. When motivation is high, the practice is enjoyable and seemingly productive. When motivation wanes, engagement falters. The inner life remains subject to mood and circumstance. This leads to inconsistency and unpredictability, as growth is tied to emotional highs rather than deliberate effort. Disciplined engagement transcends motivation. It relies on consistency, repetition, and intentional alignment rather than transient feelings. Discipline creates freedom within structure. It allows the inner life to flourish independently of emotional fluctuation, providing stability and continuity that casual effort cannot achieve. The development of focus is another area where casual and disciplined practice diverge. Casual engagement rarely produces sustained attention. The mind drifts, distractions dominate, and connection is shallow. Insights are fleeting and clarity is sporadic. Disciplined practice, however, cultivates focus over time. Repeated engagement trains attention, strengthens mental and emotional endurance, and deepens insight. The mind becomes capable of sustained reflection, discernment, and understanding. This focus carries over into decision-making, relationships, and problem-solving, transforming life in ways casual engagement rarely achieves. Discipline is not merely repetition. It is the training of attention and intention over time. Casual engagement also tends to produce surface-level effects. Comfort, temporary relief, and brief inspiration are common outcomes, but lasting transformation is uncommon. Patterns of thought and behavior remain largely unchanged because casual effort lacks the consistency necessary for deep integration. Disciplined engagement, in contrast, cultivates transformation at the root level. Repetition strengthens mental and emotional patterns, shapes perception, and refines character. The effects extend beyond moments of engagement into every area of life. Over time, disciplined effort creates a resilience and alignment that casual engagement cannot replicate, producing a foundation that supports sustained growth and stability. Relationships are influenced differently depending on the approach. Casual engagement rarely fosters depth in interactions or influence in relationships because it lacks consistency. People perceive instability, unpredictability, or superficiality. Disciplined engagement, however, strengthens presence and influence. Consistency cultivates reliability and steadiness, traits that others respond to naturally. Relationships become more constructive, balanced, and enduring. Influence grows organically because it is grounded in internal stability rather than external persuasion. Discipline shapes how one moves through social dynamics, allowing for discernment, composure, and effective interaction. Casual practice often struggles with persistence. When difficulties arise, the reaction is often retreat or avoidance. Challenges feel overwhelming because internal stability has not been cultivated. Disciplined engagement, however, builds persistence. Regular effort strengthens endurance, allowing one to navigate challenges without collapsing. Setbacks are met with resilience rather than panic. Life becomes manageable because the inner foundation has been cultivated through repetition and consistency. Discipline develops the capacity to sustain effort, focus, and composure even in the face of obstacles, which casual engagement rarely produces. Another distinction is in the development of long-term vision. Casual engagement tends to prioritize immediate emotional or practical benefits. It is oriented toward relief, reassurance, or temporary comfort. Disciplined engagement, by contrast, cultivates awareness of long-term outcomes. Repetition fosters foresight, patience, and strategic alignment. Decisions, actions, and intentions begin to reflect a deeper understanding of consequence and timing. Life is navigated with wisdom and purpose, not merely reaction. The contrast between casual and disciplined engagement becomes clear. Casual effort addresses the present moment, while disciplined effort shapes the trajectory of life. Self-awareness grows in different ways, depending on the approach. Casual engagement produces sporadic insight, limited by distraction and inconsistency. Patterns of thought, behavior, and emotional response often remain hidden. Disciplined engagement, however, cultivates sustained reflection. Repetition deepens understanding, reveals habitual patterns, and strengthens the capacity to observe oneself objectively. This self-awareness fosters intentional action, emotional regulation, and discernment, transforming how one responds to circumstances. Discipline develops the tools to engage with life thoughtfully rather than reactively, creating an internal landscape of clarity and control. Casual engagement may provide relief, but it rarely develops authority. Influence that stems from casual effort is unstable because it is dependent on variable presence, mood, or circumstance. Disciplined engagement, on the other hand, produces quiet authority. Consistency, composure, and clarity create influence that others respond to naturally. People sense reliability and stability. Authority is observed rather than demanded, growing organically from the repeated cultivation of inner strength. Discipline produces presence, credibility, and influence in ways casual engagement cannot achieve. Casual engagement also struggles with alignment. Desires, intentions, and actions remain fragmented because focus is irregular. Patterns of behavior and thought often contradict values or goals, leading to internal conflict. Disciplined engagement gradually harmonizes desire, intention, and action. Repetition strengthens alignment, reinforcing principles, priorities, and focus. Over time, actions become consistent with values and long-term goals, creating coherence that casual effort rarely produces. Discipline shapes life through consistent refinement, while casual engagement leaves fragmentation intact. Energy management differs significantly between the two approaches. Casual engagement often produces bursts of effort, followed by fatigue or withdrawal. Energy is expended inconsistently, leaving the inner life unstable and reactive. Disciplined engagement develops endurance, steadiness, and sustainable energy. Consistent practice strengthens the capacity to remain focused, composed, and effective over time. Life becomes less about reactive bursts and more about steady progress. Discipline transforms energy from a fragile resource into a stable foundation that supports growth, resilience, and influence. Ultimately, the contrast between casual and disciplined engagement is clear. Casual engagement provides temporary comfort, fleeting insight, and reactive support. It is dependent on motivation, mood, and circumstance, and rarely produces deep transformation. Disciplined engagement, by contrast, cultivates stability, clarity, resilience, and influence. It shapes character, perception, and energy. It produces authority, discernment, and alignment. It creates an internal foundation that sustains growth, guides decisions, strengthens relationships, and shapes life. Discipline produces transformation not in isolated moments, but as a cumulative force that reshapes the trajectory of life. Casual effort can soothe, but disciplined effort transforms. Consistency is not convenience. It is the cornerstone of lasting growth, stability, and purpose. 1 hour of daily engagement cultivates the conditions for this transformation, producing results that extend far beyond the immediate moment into every aspect of thought, behavior, and experience, creating a life of coherence, resilience, and meaningful influence. Consistent spiritual practice has a profound impact on character formation, shaping thought patterns, emotional responses, and behavior in ways that are both subtle and transformative. Character is rarely formed in sudden bursts. It develops over time through repeated actions, choices, and intentions that reinforce certain habits while discouraging others. When engagement with the spiritual life becomes disciplined and deliberate, it cultivates qualities that endure beyond circumstances, moods, or external pressures. What begins as a simple act of focus gradually influences integrity, patience, resilience, and self-awareness. The inner environment begins to align with higher principles, creating a foundation from which character naturally unfolds. In essence, disciplined spiritual engagement does not simply comfort or inspire. It molds the person at the deepest levels, producing a character capable of withstanding trials, making wise choices, and sustaining meaningful relationships. One of the first ways spiritual engagement influences character is through self-discipline. Habitual focus and intentional repetition train the mind and heart to follow purpose rather than impulse. Without repeated practice, habits remain inconsistent and character development is sporadic. Daily engagement reinforces patience, perseverance, and commitment. These qualities translate into other areas of life, shaping how one responds to challenges, interacts with others, and approaches responsibility. The repeated effort of consistent focus strengthens the will, creating a foundation for ethical behavior, moral courage, and reliability. Over time, the individual who practices with consistency develops a capacity to act with intentionality rather than reactivity. Character becomes a product of repeated alignment with higher principles rather than isolated moments of virtue. Spiritual practice also cultivates emotional regulation, a core aspect of character formation. Without deliberate internal work, emotions often dominate behavior, producing impulsive reactions and instability. Consistent engagement teaches awareness and management of internal states. Over time, the mind becomes capable of observing emotional impulses without being swept away by them. Patience grows naturally as the individual learns to respond thoughtfully rather than reacting to every disturbance. This emotional stability supports sound judgment, constructive interactions, and personal resilience. Character is shaped not only by action, but by the ability to maintain composure, think clearly, and act consistently under pressure. Repeated, disciplined engagement reinforces these capacities, forming a temperament that is steady, reliable, and aligned with long-term purpose. Another dimension of character formation influenced by spiritual engagement is integrity. Integrity arises when values, intentions, and actions are consistently aligned. Repeated focus on higher principles fosters awareness of discrepancies between thought and behavior. This awareness creates the opportunity to correct misalignment, to act according to principle rather than convenience or impulse. Over time, disciplined practice strengthens the internal alignment that underpins integrity. The individual becomes increasingly consistent in decisions, interactions, and behavior. Character develops in a way that is observable by others, producing trustworthiness and credibility. Integrity cultivated through disciplined engagement is resilient because it is rooted in repeated alignment rather than occasional adherence to moral ideals. Disciplined spiritual engagement also nurtures humility, a critical aspect of mature character. True humility does not arise from self-deprecation or external validation. It emerges from recognition of limitations, the complexity of life, and the need for growth. Regular engagement fosters awareness of personal weaknesses, encouraging reflection and intentional correction. It reminds the individual that growth is a process, not an event, and that character formation requires ongoing attention and effort. This humility is balanced with confidence, as repeated effort builds competence and insight without arrogance. Character shaped in this way demonstrates both grounded self-awareness and the ability to act with wisdom, creating an internal stability that guides behavior in diverse circumstances. Consistency in spiritual practice also strengthens patience, a quality often overlooked but central to character development. Modern life encourages quick results, immediate gratification, and rapid emotional responses. Habitual engagement with spiritual discipline cultivates the ability to wait, endure, and persist despite challenges. The repeated act of returning to focus despite distraction or resistance develops resilience and long-term vision. Patience learned in this way extends beyond the act itself, influencing decision-making, goal pursuit, and relationships. The individual becomes less reactive, more measured, and more capable of sustaining effort toward meaningful outcomes. Character is formed not in the absence of difficulty, but in the repeated practice of composure, reflection, and deliberate action. Empathy and compassion are also shaped through consistent spiritual engagement. Attention to higher principles, reflection on personal conduct, and cultivation of awareness deepen the capacity to understand others. The repeated focus on internal alignment fosters sensitivity to needs, perspectives, and struggles beyond oneself. Character that develops in this way is relational as well as personal, demonstrating care, patience, and constructive engagement with others. Compassion becomes a habitual response rather than a conditional reaction. Over time, the individual's interactions reflect steadiness, reliability, and a commitment to act in ways that uplift rather than harm. This relational maturity is an integral part of character formation, ensuring that personal growth translates into meaningful influence in the broader environment. Disciplined engagement also fosters resilience, a cornerstone of mature character. Life is unpredictable, and challenges are inevitable. Without consistent internal alignment, setbacks can destabilize emotional, mental, and relational equilibrium. Repeated engagement with spiritual focus strengthens the capacity to endure difficulty, maintain clarity, and recover from adversity. The individual becomes capable of navigating trials with composure, learning from experience, and maintaining direction despite obstacles. Resilience formed in this way reinforces other aspects of character, including patience, integrity, and emotional regulation, creating a robust internal structure that sustains growth over time. Self-awareness is further enhanced through disciplined practice. Character is shaped by the ability to observe one's own thoughts, motivations, and patterns of behavior. Casual engagement often provides only fleeting insight, leaving the individual unaware of recurring habits or inconsistencies. Consistent engagement allows repeated observation, reflection, and adjustment. Awareness of internal tendencies enables intentional action rather than reactive response, reinforcing the alignment between values and behavior. Over time, this heightened self-awareness forms the foundation for personal accountability, discernment, and ethical decision-making. Character is strengthened by the capacity to perceive, understand, and correct internal misalignment before it manifests externally. Disciplined engagement also produces moral courage, the capacity to act according to principle despite difficulty, opposition, or fear. Casual engagement may inspire occasional ethical behavior, but it rarely develops the sustained strength to consistently uphold values under pressure. Repeated alignment with higher principles reinforces conviction, clarity, and internal authority. The individual becomes capable of acting decisively in accordance with what is right, regardless of external pressure or personal cost. Character formed in this way demonstrates both ethical integrity and practical wisdom, producing influence and trust in both personal and communal contexts. Moral courage is the product of repeated alignment rather than sporadic inspiration. Another aspect of character shaped by consistent spiritual engagement is perseverance. Growth, development, and meaningful achievement rarely occur without effort sustained over time. Discipline cultivates the capacity to endure, remain focused, and continue progress despite setbacks or distraction. The repeated effort trains the mind, strengthens habits, and reinforces purpose. Perseverance becomes a defining trait, evident in decision-making, goal pursuit, and relational consistency. Character formed through perseverance is reliable, steadfast, and capable of long-term vision, distinguishing it from the fleeting or inconsistent traits cultivated through casual engagement. Disciplined engagement also enhances discernment. The ability to perceive nuance, recognize underlying motives, and make wise choices is developed through repeated reflection and alignment. Casual engagement often produces superficial understanding, limited to immediate concerns or emotional impulses. Consistent practice cultivates depth of perception, enabling the individual to navigate complexity with clarity and insight. Discernment informs decisions, relationships, and responses to challenge, shaping character that is wise, balanced, and adaptable. It reinforces other aspects of maturity, including integrity, patience, and emotional regulation. Consistency in spiritual focus also produces internal coherence, a sense that thought, emotion, and action are aligned rather than fragmented. Casual engagement leaves gaps between intention and behavior, producing internal conflict or instability. Repeated practice harmonizes internal states, creating steadiness, clarity, and predictability. This internal coherence reinforces reliability, accountability, and trustworthiness. Character shaped by coherence reflects strength, stability, and alignment, enabling consistent action under pressure, ethical decision-making, and meaningful influence in relationships and community. Character formation through disciplined engagement also fosters gratitude and perspective. Regular focus on higher principles encourages reflection on life's experiences, both challenges and blessings. Over time, the individual develops awareness of what is valuable, meaningful, and enduring, reducing attachment to transient or superficial concerns. Gratitude and perspective contribute to emotional stability, relational maturity, and ethical behavior. They form the lens through which decisions are made and actions are guided. Casual engagement rarely produces this depth of awareness, leaving the individual more susceptible to frustration, envy, or reactive behavior. Ultimately, disciplined spiritual engagement produces a holistic transformation of character. It cultivates integrity, patience, perseverance, emotional regulation, moral courage, discernment, humility, resilience, self-awareness, and relational maturity. These qualities interact and reinforce one another, producing a stable, coherent, and reliable inner life. The individual becomes capable of navigating challenges with composure, making decisions with wisdom, acting ethically under pressure, and interacting with others constructively. Character becomes both internal and relational, evident in thought, behavior, and influence. Unlike casual engagement, which provides fleeting comfort or temporary inspiration, disciplined engagement produces enduring change, shaping the person at the deepest levels and establishing a foundation for a meaningful and purposeful life. Consistent spiritual engagement, practiced daily over time, transforms the individual from reactive to intentional, from fragmented to coherent, from inconsistent to reliable. Character is no longer determined by circumstance or emotion, but by cultivated habits of attention, alignment, and reflection. The individual becomes capable of sustaining growth, exercising judgment, and influencing others with steadiness and integrity. Moral courage, empathy, resilience, and discernment emerge naturally, forming a person whose internal life is strong and whose external impact is constructive. Character, once shaped through disciplined engagement, endures, providing a foundation for meaningful decisions, stable relationships, and a purposeful trajectory in life. The transformation is cumulative, quiet, and profound, creating a person who embodies principles through habitual practice, demonstrating that true character is the product of repeated, deliberate alignment, rather than occasional inspiration or convenience. Beloved, consistent engagement with spiritual discipline is one of the most transformative forces in the pursuit of freedom from sin. Sin is rarely simply a single act. It is often the culmination of repeated patterns, habits, and choices that gradually take control of thought, emotion, and behavior. These patterns develop subtly, almost unnoticed, until they dominate responses and decisions. Freedom from sin does not come from a single effort, a fleeting moment of moral resolve or external enforcement. It emerges gradually as the inner life is reshaped through repeated focus, intentionality, and alignment with higher principles. When spiritual engagement becomes a daily, consistent practice, it strengthens awareness, reshapes desires, and redirects impulses. Actions that once were automatic begin to be observed, assessed, and corrected. Over time, destructive habits lose their power, replaced by patterns that support integrity, clarity, and intentional living. True freedom from sin is not merely about avoiding wrongdoing. It is about cultivating the internal strength, awareness, and authority to act according to principle, even when impulses or external circumstances are compelling. The first dimension of freedom from sin is awareness. Without awareness, destructive patterns operate in the background, unnoticed and unchecked. Many impulses that lead to repeated failure begin as subtle thoughts or emotions that seem harmless until they grow into habitual responses. Consistent engagement cultivates the ability to notice these internal movements. It allows the mind to observe thought, emotion, and desire without being overwhelmed by them. This observational capacity is the foundation of freedom, because recognition precedes choice. When the individual can identify the moments when impulses arise, there is an opportunity to respond differently. Awareness transforms what was once automatic into a moment of conscious decision-making. Without it, freedom remains out of reach, and patterns of sin continue to operate unchecked, subtly shaping behavior over time. As awareness strengthens, the ability to resist temptation grows. Regular spiritual discipline trains the mind and emotions to pause, reflect, and redirect. Temptations that previously felt irresistible are gradually seen for what they are, recurring patterns that no longer hold authority over action. Repeated engagement cultivates mental and emotional endurance, allowing the individual to observe impulses without yielding to them. Over time, the power of old habits diminishes because attention and intention gradually reshape the internal structures that once supported destructive behavior. Resistance is not merely a matter of effort or willpower. It emerges naturally from the repeated alignment of thought and desire with higher principles. Freedom from sin is achieved not by suppressing impulses temporarily, but by transforming the internal conditions that gave them power in the first place. Consistency also transforms desire itself. The repeated practice of focus and alignment gradually changes what the individual finds appealing or compelling. Desires that once dictated behavior lose their dominance, replaced by inclinations aligned with integrity, clarity, and higher purpose. This transformation is subtle but profound. It is not a matter of force or coercion, but of the repeated reinforcement of constructive patterns over destructive ones. When desires align with disciplined attention and higher principles, freedom becomes not just possible, but natural. Temptation loses its power because it no longer resonates with the prevailing inclinations of the heart and mind. The internal environment shifts, creating conditions in which constructive choices are the default rather than the exception. Emotional regulation is another critical factor in freedom from sin. Many destructive behaviors arise from unmanaged emotions. Anger, fear, envy, lust, and impatience can drive decisions that are contrary to principle if they are left unchecked. Consistent spiritual engagement cultivates the capacity to notice emotional surges before they dictate action. The mind learns to observe feelings without being controlled by them, creating a space in which deliberate, aligned response is possible. Emotional impulses are not denied or suppressed, but understood, managed, and redirected. This process strengthens self-control, resilience, and intentionality, making consistent ethical action increasingly natural. Over time, emotional volatility diminishes, replaced by a steady capacity to act in accordance with principle rather than reaction. The formation of new habits is essential for lasting freedom from sin. Destructive patterns operate through repetition, and breaking them requires replacing them with consistent, constructive behavior. Daily engagement reinforces mental and emotional routines that support alignment, reflection, and intentional action. Each repetition strengthens the neural and psychological pathways that make these constructive responses habitual. The previously automatic reactions to temptation are gradually supplanted by deliberate choice, creating a life shaped by principle rather than impulse. Habitual alignment transforms the inner life, making freedom sustainable. It is not enough to avoid wrongdoing occasionally. The internal patterns that enable freedom must be cultivated continuously. Discernment is strengthened through repeated engagement. Freedom from sin is not only about resisting immediate impulses, but about recognizing the subtle influences that encourage misalignment over time. Consistent practice develops the capacity to identify situations, environments, and relationships that are likely to reinforce destructive patterns. This heightened awareness allows the individual to proactively create circumstances that support freedom rather than undermine it. Discernment sharpens perception, enabling wise choices that prevent the emergence of habitual wrongdoing. Over time, the ability to navigate life with clarity and intentionality becomes second nature, reinforcing the internal stability necessary for sustained freedom. Accountability is also cultivated through consistent engagement. Internal discipline creates a self-regulating system in which the individual notices deviations from principle and corrects course before patterns become entrenched. Habitual reflection, awareness of tendencies, and understanding of triggers produce internal mechanisms for guidance and correction. Freedom from sin is reinforced because the individual is no longer dependent solely on external oversight or sudden moral resolve. Internal accountability becomes reliable, continuous, and self-reinforcing, allowing consistent alignment even in the absence of immediate external consequence or supervision. Internal authority develops as a natural outcome of consistent engagement. The repeated effort to align thought, emotion, and action strengthens the ability to govern impulses and act in accordance with principle. This authority is not imposed, but cultivated. It emerges from the reliability of internal patterns of awareness, reflection, and alignment. The individual gains mastery over impulses that once dictated behavior, creating a stable inner foundation for freedom. Authority over oneself becomes habitual, making deliberate choice the natural response rather than impulsive reaction. Over time, this internal governance extends to all areas of life, shaping decisions, interactions, and personal conduct. Integrity is another product of disciplined engagement. Consistent focus on alignment reinforces coherence between values, intentions, and actions. The individual develops the capacity to act consistently according to principle, creating a reliable internal structure that resists deviation. Freedom from sin is not only about avoidance, but about the cultivation of integrity through repeated alignment. When internal coherence is established, choices naturally reflect principle, and destructive impulses lose their influence. Integrity becomes self-reinforcing, producing both internal stability and external reliability in thought, behavior, and relationships. Resilience is strengthened through repeated engagement. Freedom from sin is tested continuously because impulses and opportunities for misalignment recur throughout life. Consistent practice builds endurance and the capacity to maintain alignment despite repeated challenges. Setbacks are met with reflection, correction, and renewed effort rather than despair or resignation. The individual learns to recover from lapses, restore alignment, and continue forward. This resilience ensures that freedom is not fragile or temporary, but enduring, supported by repeated, disciplined cultivation of awareness, choice, and alignment. Humility is integral to freedom from sin. Awareness of personal tendencies, limitations, and vulnerabilities fosters reflection and intentional correction. Humility allows the individual to recognize weaknesses without being dominated by them, creating space for growth and adjustment. Freedom is strengthened because actions are guided by clarity and principle rather than pride or denial. Humility supports continuous internal evaluation, reflection, and responsiveness, reinforcing the patterns necessary for sustained alignment and constructive behavior. It ensures that freedom is grounded in awareness rather than self-deception or overconfidence. Thought patterns themselves are reshaped through consistent engagement. Many destructive behaviors originate in the mind, where rationalizations, desires, and distractions take root. Repeated practice trains attention and perception, redirecting thought away from harmful patterns and toward constructive, aligned patterns. Over time, the mind itself becomes an environment that supports freedom, where impulses are filtered through discernment, awareness, and deliberate choice rather than acting automatically. The reshaping of thought patterns is essential because behavior is the natural outflow of habitual cognition and perception. Deliberate choice becomes the hallmark of freedom. Repeated engagement reinforces the habit of observing impulses, assessing consequences, and acting in alignment with principle. Decisions are no longer reactive but intentional, guided by awareness and internal authority. Each deliberate action reinforces internal patterns, gradually supplanting destructive behaviors with consistent, constructive choices. Over time, deliberate choice becomes habitual, producing a life in which freedom from sin is sustained by repeated alignment of thought, emotion, and behavior, rather than fleeting moments of willpower or moral inspiration. Relational dynamics are also affected by internal alignment. Freedom from sin manifests in interactions with others, influencing behavior in relationships, communication, and decision-making. Patterns of manipulation, selfishness, anger, or deceit diminish as internal coherence strengthens. Constructive patterns such as patience, empathy, integrity, and reliability increase. Interpersonal influence becomes aligned with principle, reflecting the stability and authority cultivated internally. Freedom from sin extends outward, shaping the quality of relationships, trustworthiness, and the capacity to act constructively in social contexts. It demonstrates that transformation is holistic, affecting internal life and external expression simultaneously. Over time, freedom becomes natural. Repeated, disciplined engagement establishes patterns that make alignment the default, rather than an occasional achievement. Impulses and desires that once held authority are replaced by habitual attentiveness, discernment, and intentionality. Internal structures reinforce coherence and integrity, making freedom self-sustaining. It is no longer a temporary state achieved through effort, but a condition of the inner life cultivated over time. Freedom from sin is durable, integrated, and evident in thought, action, and relational influence. It emerges as the natural result of repeated, deliberate focus rather than a momentary exertion of willpower. Ultimately, freedom from sin through consistent spiritual engagement is both process and outcome. The process involves repeated cultivation of awareness, discernment, emotional regulation, habit formation, and intentional choice. Each element reinforces the others, producing cumulative change. The outcome is internal authority, coherence, resilience, integrity, and relational maturity. Impulses, destructive patterns, and habitual misalignment lose their dominance. The inner life operates from clarity, principle, and intentionality, producing freedom that is enduring. This transformation extends across thought, desire, behavior, and interaction, creating an integrated, stable, and resilient inner life. Freedom from sin is not a fleeting accomplishment, but the natural cumulative result of disciplined, consistent engagement that reshapes the individual at the deepest levels. Purpose is rarely realized without preparation. The lives of those who accomplish great things are rarely defined by sudden inspiration alone. They are shaped by deliberate, consistent cultivation of character, awareness, and skill long before the moment of manifestation arrives. Preparation for purpose is not a passive process. It is active, intentional, and often unseen. It shapes the inner life, aligning thought, emotion, and action with the direction one is destined to pursue. It is the quiet development that allows a person to step fully into opportunity when it appears. Without preparation, even the clearest vision or strongest calling can falter because the inner structures necessary to sustain action are missing. The process of preparation builds the resilience, discernment, integrity, and clarity that purpose requires, creating the conditions for meaningful achievement and alignment with one's intended path. Preparation begins with self-awareness. Understanding strengths, weaknesses, patterns of thought, and habitual responses is essential before any meaningful pursuit can occur. Without knowledge of the self, efforts toward purpose are often misdirected or superficial. Consistent reflection cultivates insight into motivations and tendencies, revealing areas that require growth or realignment. Awareness allows the individual to address weaknesses that could undermine future endeavors and to strengthen capacities that will support them. This process creates an internal map, guiding focus and energy toward areas that will maximize potential. Purpose emerges most clearly and effectively when it is grounded in an accurate, honest understanding of one's own capacities and limitations. Discipline is a central element of preparation. Purpose rarely aligns with immediate gratification or ease. Consistent, intentional effort develops the habits and endurance required to act effectively when opportunity arises. Discipline strengthens focus, refines skill, and cultivates the internal stamina needed to persist through challenge and uncertainty. The individual who has practiced consistent alignment of thought and action finds it easier to navigate complexity without being derailed by distraction or fatigue. Discipline also reinforces resilience, as repeated effort in preparation builds the capacity to withstand setbacks without losing clarity of purpose. The person who is prepared through disciplined engagement can respond to challenges with composure and sustained energy, qualities essential for the realization of any meaningful goal. Growth through trial and reflection is another critical dimension. Preparation is rarely linear. It often involves encountering challenges, making mistakes, and learning from experience. These moments refine judgment, deepen understanding, and strengthen character. Each challenge presents an opportunity to test capacity, adjust strategy, and cultivate endurance. Without encountering difficulty, preparation remains theoretical rather than practical, leaving the individual untested when true opportunity arrives. Repeated engagement with challenges hones discernment and develops the flexibility necessary to navigate uncertainty. Purpose is realized more fully by those who have been refined through consistent engagement with growth, allowing insight, skill, and resilience to coalesce into readiness. Emotional maturity is cultivated through preparation. Purpose often requires sustained effort, patience, and composure in the face of disappointment or delay. The ability to regulate emotional responses ensures that decision-making is not dominated by reactive impulses. Regular engagement in reflection, discipline, and alignment fosters emotional stability, allowing the individual to act with clarity and intention even when circumstances are challenging. Emotional maturity also supports constructive interaction with others, enabling collaboration, leadership, and influence. Those who have prepared effectively navigate tension and conflict with steadiness, reinforcing the relational capacities necessary for purposeful action. Preparation shapes desire and focus. Impulses that might distract from purpose are tempered, and priorities are clarified. The repeated alignment of thought, attention, and action cultivates the ability to focus on what is most important. Purpose requires sustained engagement with meaningful goals rather than fleeting interests or distractions. Over time, repeated focus trains the mind and heart to recognize what is constructive, aligning natural inclination with long-term objectives. This internal clarity ensures that energy is directed consistently toward outcomes that are aligned with intended purpose, rather than being scattered across superficial or temporary concerns. Character is developed through preparation. Purpose is rarely realized without integrity, resilience, patience, and discernment. Consistent cultivation of these qualities builds an internal foundation capable of supporting sustained effort and meaningful achievement. Strength of character ensures that the individual can act consistently according to principle, make sound decisions under pressure, and maintain alignment with values even when external circumstances are challenging. Preparation in this sense is not merely the acquisition of knowledge or skill, but the shaping of internal structures that govern thought, action, and interaction. Purpose is realized most fully by those whose inner life is stable, coherent, and resilient. Skill acquisition is another crucial element. Purpose often requires specific abilities that cannot be improvised at the moment of opportunity. Preparation involves the deliberate cultivation of skill through study, practice, and reflection. Repeated engagement hones competence, sharpens perception, and builds confidence in execution. Without mastery of relevant skills, opportunities can be missed and potential impact is diminished. Preparation transforms raw potential into actionable capacity, enabling the individual to operate effectively when circumstances demand performance. Skills developed over time create a reservoir of competence that supports confident, aligned action when purpose calls. Preparation also fosters discernment. The ability to recognize opportunities, evaluate options, and make informed choices is developed through repeated reflection, observation, and practice. Discernment allows the individual to act strategically rather than reactively, ensuring that effort is applied in ways that maximize impact. Those who have prepared consistently are able to see patterns, anticipate consequences, and align actions with principle and objective. Without discernment, opportunities can be misjudged, and effort may be misdirected, leaving purpose unrealized. Preparation creates the clarity and perspective necessary to navigate complex circumstances effectively. Relationships and networks are influenced by preparation. Purpose rarely exists in isolation. It intersects with other people, systems, and environments. Consistent cultivation of character, emotional maturity, and relational skill enhances the ability to collaborate, influence, and lead. Preparation ensures that the individual can engage constructively with others, leveraging relationships to support meaningful objectives. Internal coherence and stability also contribute to trustworthiness, reliability, and credibility, qualities that strengthen the capacity to mobilize support and act effectively in pursuit of purpose. Time management and prioritization emerge as natural outcomes of preparation. Purpose requires sustained attention and energy, and repeated engagement with disciplined focus develops the capacity to organize resources effectively. Habits of planning, reflection, and strategic allocation of effort ensure that meaningful goals are pursued with consistency and efficiency. Preparation trains the individual to discern what demands immediate attention and what can be deferred, creating the capacity to act in alignment with long-term objectives without being distracted by trivial or urgent but inconsequential matters. Resilience is strengthened through repeated preparation. Purpose is rarely realized without encountering obstacles, setbacks, and periods of uncertainty. Those who have prepared consistently develop the ability to persist, adapt, and recover without losing direction or composure. Repeated engagement with challenge strengthens internal resources, enabling the individual to maintain alignment even when circumstances are difficult. Resilience ensures that temporary setbacks do not derail progress, allowing sustained movement toward meaningful outcomes. Preparation cultivates this endurance, transforming the individual into someone capable of weathering trials and emerging strengthened rather than diminished. Internal coherence is a central product of preparation. Thought, emotion, and action gradually align through repeated engagement, creating a stable and reliable inner environment. Internal coherence allows for consistent behavior, sound judgment, and clarity in decision-making. It provides a framework in which purpose can emerge naturally because the internal structures that support focus, alignment, and intentionality are already in place. Without coherence, efforts toward purpose are often fragmented or reactive, undermining potential impact and clarity of direction. Preparation builds this alignment over time, creating an internal foundation capable of sustaining purposeful action in any circumstance. Vision is sharpened through preparation. Consistent reflection, engagement with principle, and alignment of thought and action clarify the direction in which energy and focus should be applied. Vision emerges not as a vague aspiration, but as a concrete understanding of what is meaningful, actionable, and aligned with long-term objectives. Those who have prepared consistently can recognize opportunities that support their trajectory and avoid distractions that might misdirect effort. Preparation cultivates clarity of purpose, ensuring that the individual is equipped to recognize and step into opportunity when it arises. Confidence develops as a result of preparation. The accumulation of experience, skill, and alignment fosters a natural assurance in the ability to act effectively. This confidence is not arrogance, but grounded in repeated practice, reflection, and competence. It enables decisive action and prevents hesitation or self-doubt from undermining potential. Confidence derived from preparation is resilient, emerging from tangible internal readiness rather than superficial optimism. It allows the individual to pursue purpose with clarity, intentionality, and poise, even in the face of uncertainty or challenge. Preparation integrates multiple dimensions: awareness, discipline, character, skill, discernment, resilience, and relational maturity into a coherent foundation for action. It transforms potential into capacity and vision into readiness. Without preparation, even the most compelling purpose may falter because the internal and external resources required to realize it are not yet aligned. Purpose is realized most fully when it emerges from a life that has been intentionally cultivated, tested, and refined. Every moment of consistent engagement contributes to this readiness, creating an internal environment in which clarity, alignment, and effectiveness are natural outcomes. Ultimately, preparation for purpose is the deliberate shaping of the inner life, habits, skills, and discernment to meet the demands of opportunity and calling. It is not passive or accidental. It requires sustained attention, reflection, and action. Through preparation, the individual develops resilience, clarity, competence, character, and coherence, creating the conditions in which purpose can be recognized and pursued effectively. Purpose is not a sudden discovery, but the natural result of repeated cultivation of readiness over time. Those who prepare consistently are equipped to act decisively, navigate complexity with composure, and sustain effort toward meaningful outcomes. Preparation transforms latent potential into realized capability, ensuring that when opportunity arises, the individual is not only ready, but capable of fulfilling the path for which they have been shaped. Dear child of God, the journey of daily spiritual engagement transforms every aspect of life. It reshapes thought, strengthens character, cultivates resilience, and aligns desire with purpose. Over time, the inner life becomes a place of clarity, strength, and intentionality. Patterns that once held power lose their grip, and impulses are replaced by deliberate, aligned action. Freedom from sin is realized not as a fleeting achievement, but as a natural outcome of consistent cultivation. Emotional maturity, discernment, and internal authority grow steadily, preparing the individual to step fully into their calling. The subtle yet profound changes that occur ripple outward, affecting relationships, decisions, and every interaction, creating an environment where alignment, integrity, and purpose flourish. This is an invitation to take the next step together. Consistent engagement has the power to transform not only your inner life, but your entire journey. Join in focused, intentional reflection and connection, allowing the principles we have explored to take root deeply within. Make time to center your heart and mind, to seek alignment and strength, and to cultivate the inner structures that prepare you for purpose and freedom. Together, we can experience the profound shifts that daily spiritual focus brings, stepping into a life of clarity, resilience, and meaningful impact. Take that step now and embrace the transformation that awaits. Heavenly Presence, I come with a heart open to transformation, ready to align every thought, every emotion, and every desire with the path you have prepared for me. I acknowledge the areas within me that resist clarity, the tendencies that pull me away from alignment, and the patterns that limit my potential. I invite strength to rise within me, the strength that steadies my mind, steadies my heart, and allows me to act with intention in every moment. Fill me with discernment, that I may recognize what is constructive and release what is destructive. Grant me the wisdom to see beyond the immediate, to understand the subtle currents that shape my choices, and to respond in ways that reflect integrity, purpose, and alignment. Spirit of guidance, shape my internal life. Teach me to observe impulses without being controlled by them. Help me cultivate patience when desire pushes for immediate satisfaction, and clarity when distraction seeks to scatter my focus. Let me feel the power of alignment in every decision, the strength of coherent thought in every challenge, and the resilience that emerges when I act consistently with principle. Allow my inner life to become a place of stability and authority, where intentionality replaces habit and where reflection guides action. Make my mind receptive to insight, my heart receptive to transformation, and my life receptive to the opportunities that are aligned with my purpose. Transform my desires, that they may rise in harmony with higher values. Let the temptations that once held sway lose their appeal, replaced by inclinations that reflect growth, discipline, and alignment. Help me to cultivate long-term vision over fleeting impulses and clarity over confusion. Guide me to act from a place of strength rather than reaction, from principle rather than impulse, and from awareness rather than habit. Let the habits of alignment, reflection, and intentionality take root deeply within me, shaping every choice, every interaction, and every moment of thought. May the patterns of my life reflect coherence, integrity, and readiness to step fully into the purpose you have prepared. Grant me resilience when challenges arise, the endurance to remain steady when circumstances are difficult, and the courage to continue even when the path is unclear. Let setbacks become opportunities for growth, lapses become moments of reflection, and difficulties become catalysts for wisdom. Build within me an internal authority that cannot be shaken by circumstance, a steady clarity that persists amid uncertainty, and a composure that allows me to act consistently, guided by discernment and principle. Let the strength cultivated in preparation carry me through every trial, shaping me into someone capable of fulfilling the potential and purpose you have placed before me. Shape my relationships, my interactions, and my influence with others. Grant me the ability to act constructively, to communicate with clarity, and to engage with integrity. Let patience, empathy, and understanding guide my words, actions, and decisions, creating an environment where alignment and purpose flourish. Help me to inspire stability and trust, to model coherence in thought and action, and to contribute positively to the spaces in which I move. Allow the internal work of focus, reflection, and alignment to extend naturally into my external life, transforming interactions, decisions, and influence in ways that reflect the integrity of my inner cultivation. Guide me in the development of skill, competence, and clarity that I may act effectively when opportunity arises. Grant me the discipline to practice consistently, the patience to refine my abilities over time, and the discernment to recognize the paths where my effort will have the most impact. Let preparation and deliberate cultivation become second nature, ensuring that when the moment arrives, I am equipped to respond decisively, wisely, and with full alignment. Help me to embrace growth as a constant, learning from challenges, refining my approach, and steadily advancing toward the realization of purpose. May humility anchor my progress. Let awareness of my limitations, vulnerabilities, and weaknesses become a source of reflection and strength, rather than discouragement. Guide me to act with discernment, openness, and intentionality, avoiding arrogance, pride, or denial. Allow humility to deepen my internal coherence, support accountability, and reinforce alignment between thought, emotion, and action. Make me receptive to guidance, insight, and correction, cultivating an internal environment in which freedom, clarity, and strength flourish. Let every choice, action, and reflection be grounded in honesty, self-awareness, and principle. Fill me with focus, that distractions may lose their hold and clarity may guide every decision. Let attention naturally settle on what is meaningful, constructive, and aligned with purpose. Strengthen my capacity to prioritize, to discern what demands energy, and to act consistently in ways that move me toward long-term goals rather than momentary gratification. Teach me to cultivate internal order, to maintain coherence in thought and action, and to allow deliberate intention to shape the flow of my life. Let consistency become habitual, and let alignment in daily practice become the foundation for freedom, growth, and fulfillment. Spirit of endurance, help me sustain my efforts without fatigue, discouragement, or wavering. Let repeated engagement with reflection, alignment, and cultivation of strength reinforce internal stability, resilience, and clarity. Build within me an enduring capacity to act with intention even under pressure, to maintain integrity when challenged, and to sustain effort when progress is slow or unseen. Allow the repeated practice of focus, discipline, and alignment to produce lasting transformation, shaping thought, desire, behavior, and interaction in ways that reflect readiness, coherence, and alignment with purpose. Finally, let every action, thought, and decision reflect alignment with higher values. Let my internal life mirror clarity, strength, and coherence, and let these qualities manifest naturally in my external circumstances. Transform my impulses into deliberate action, my habits into intentional cultivation, and my challenges into opportunities for growth. Allow freedom, discernment, and authority to arise naturally from consistent engagement with these principles. May my life become a testament to the power of preparation, alignment, and intentionality, and may every step bring me closer to the fulfillment of the path I am called to walk. Thank you for watching. If this message blessed your soul, type Amen in the comments to proclaim Jesus' love. Watch another powerful video by clicking on the left and subscribe to grow stronger in Him. God bless you abundantly.